The titanium-vanadium alloy hull of the Abyss Watcher cut silently through the frigid depths of the North Atlantic. The vessel's stealth systems were operating at peak efficiency, rendering it invisible to any Earth-based detection technology. Its sleek, elongated form, reminiscent of both predatory fish and advanced submersibles, was designed for optimal movement through liquid environments while maintaining an absolute minimum energy signature. Commander Kalen stood rigidly before the main observation screen, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the command deck. Like all Aquilarians, he possessed a slightly iridescent skin tone that shifted subtly between blue and green under the soft ambient lighting of the ship. His large, dark eyes, evolved for seeing in the dim waters of a home world now millions of light years away, scanned the data displays with practiced efficiency. "Status report," he demanded, voice low and measured. Science Officer Lyra responded promptly, her slender fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "All systems nominal, Commander. We're maintaining position at 400 meters depth. External temperature -2 degrees Celsius. Salinity levels consistent with regional parameters. Biomass concentrations higher than expected, but within acceptable observation range." Kalen nodded, suppressing the familiar discomfort that always arose when confronted with the reality of Earth's oceans. The Aquilarians were a spacefaring race that had abandoned their oceanic origins millions of years ago, evolving into beings who traversed the void between stars with consummate ease, yet paradoxically harbored an instinctive, almost pathological fear of deep water bodies. The scientific term was thalassophobia, an ironic affliction for a species whose distant ancestors had once dominated seas far more treacherous than Earth's. "And our subject?" he asked. Lyra switched the main display to a surface view captured by their atmosphere-penetrating sensors. The image showed a small wooden vessel bobbing on the waves above, still following the same pattern. "The human has been at sea for approximately 6 local hours. Our analysis suggests routine fishing activity." Kalen couldn't suppress a shudder. It defies rational explanation. These primitives willingly venture into this chaos, in vessels that wouldn't withstand even a moderate impact. He gestured toward the screen with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "Look at that craft, constructed from organic materials, powered by fossil fuels, protected by nothing more than a thin shell that would rupture at the slightest pressure differential. Remarkable adaptation strategy," Lyra noted clinically. "They appear to compensate for technological deficiencies with behavioral modifications and simple tool usage. The subject demonstrates considerable skill in navigating surface conditions that, objectively speaking, should overwhelm such a primitive vessel." The subject in question was Elias, though the Aquilarians knew him only as human designation NE 478. 72 years old, with weather-beaten skin that told the story of a lifetime spent under the open sky. Elias moved about his modest fishing boat, the Sea Lark, with the sure-footed grace of a man who knew every splinter and nail of his vessel. His gnarled hands worked methodically at the nets, extracting the day's modest catch with practiced efficiency. The North Atlantic had been generous today, enough cod and haddock to justify the journey, with perhaps a bit extra to smoke and preserve for the harder days that inevitably came with this profession. Elias paused in his work, straightening his aching back as he surveyed the horizon with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. The wind had shifted slightly, carrying the distant scent of an approaching weather system. The sea's rhythm beneath the hull had changed too, subtle variations that most would never notice, but that spoke volumes to someone who had spent 7 decades reading these signs. "Time to head in, old girl," he murmured to the Sea Lark, patting the worn wooden gunwale affectionately. "Weather's turning." He moved to the small wheelhouse, adjusting his course with minimal movements of the tiller. No GPS guided his path, though he had one stowed below as a concession to modern maritime regulations. Instead, he navigated by the landmarks he'd known since childhood. The distinctive formation of coastal rocks, the changing color of the water that indicated specific underwater features, the patterns of seabirds that congregated over certain areas. Below the surface, on the command deck of the Abyss Watcher, Kalen and his crew continued their observation. Subject appears to be altering course, reported the sensor technician. Returning to the designated home port earlier than the established pattern would suggest. Lyra examined the atmospheric data. Interesting. Their primitive weather forecasting systems have not yet issued any alerts, but our sensors detect a significant pressure system forming approximately 200 kilometers to the northeast. It appears the human has somehow anticipated this. Impossible, Kalen stated flatly. Their sensory capabilities are severely limited. They possess no technologies for detecting distant weather formations without satellite assistance. Nevertheless, Lyra replied, the behavior is consistent. This represents the 7th documented instance where human designation NE-478 has preemptively responded to changing environmental conditions before their detection technologies registered the change. Kalen frowned, his large eyes narrowing slightly. Mark it in the observation log. The Central Science Authority will want to review this apparent anomaly. The Aquilarians have been studying Earth's oceans for decades, maintaining a careful distance as dictated by the non-interference protocols. Their mission was straightforward: observe and document the biosphere of this predominantly water-covered world, with particular focus on the indigenous species' interaction with the marine environment. For the Aquilarians, Earth's oceans represented a living museum of horrors, an evolutionary battleground dominated by the same kind of apex predators that had driven their ancient ancestors from the seas of their homeworld. The massive cetaceans, the predatory sharks, the crushing pressures, and unpredictable currents all reflected the primal chaos they had escaped millions of years ago. The humans not only survived alongside such dangers, but actively sought them out was both baffling and disturbing to Aquilarian sensibilities. On the surface, Elias had just secured the last of his equipment when the first winds of the approaching storm began to ruffle the water's surface. The Sea Lark responded instantly, riding the building swells with the bobbing resilience that had served her well for 30 years. "Bit more than I expected," Elias muttered, noting the rapidly darkening sky to the northeast. The pressure was dropping faster than he'd anticipated, suggesting this wasn't just a routine squall. He needed to make for the nearest natural harbor rather than attempt the longer journey home. He adjusted course toward a sheltered inlet several kilometers down the coastline, a narrow fjord protected by high stone walls that had saved him from similar situations in the past. It would mean a longer trip home eventually, but the Sea Lark would be safe from the worst of what was coming. The Abyss Watcher's sensors registered the change immediately. "Subject has altered course again," announced the technician. "New trajectory suggests." He paused, rechecking the data. "Commander, the storm system is intensifying rapidly. Classification now elevated to severe meteorological event." Kalen studied the projection. "Maintain observation distance. Increase depth to avoid turbulence." "Sir," Lyra interjected, "the projected path of this storm will intersect with our current position in approximately 40 minutes. Recommend we relocate to Sector 49 for continued observation." Kalen considered this. Accepted. Navigation plot course to. The ship suddenly lurched violently, throwing several crew members against their stations. Emergency lights flashed as stabilization systems fought to compensate. "Report," Kalen demanded, regaining his footing. The chief engineer's voice came through the communication system, tense with controlled panic. "Massive subsurface turbulence, Commander. Something large just passed beneath us. Possibly geological activity or biological entity. Sensors couldn't get a clear reading before impact." Another violent shudder ran through the ship, followed by a series of alarming alerts. "Stealth field generators compromised," reported the systems officer. "Hull integrity at 87% and holding, but cloaking systems are failing. Primary propulsion damaged. Secondary systems engaging, but at reduced capacity." Kalen's mind raced through the possibilities. Whatever had struck them, whether undersea landslide, rogue current, or some unknown deep-sea leviathan, had left them vulnerable. With compromised stealth capabilities and damaged propulsion, they were now in danger of both detection and destruction. Options, he demanded. The navigation officer spoke up. The coastal formation the human vessel is heading toward. Preliminary scans indicate a deep, sheltered inlet. It would provide protection from the storm and minimal exposure to surface detection systems. A fjord, Lyra supplied. Natural formation, likely carved by ancient glacial movement. Kalen despised the idea of moving closer to shore, closer to the surface, closer to the unpredictable savagery of Earth's maritime environment. But their options were limited, and the non-interference protocols were absolute. Avoid detection at all costs. Proceed to the fjord, he ordered. Maintain maximum possible depth. Divert all non-essential power to remaining stealth systems. As the Abyss Watcher limped toward the shelter of the fjord, above them, Elias guided the Sea Lark through the increasingly choppy waters. The storm was advancing faster than any weather system he'd witnessed in recent years, with winds already gusting to near gale force. Rain began to lash at his face as he secured the wheelhouse door, grateful for the sturdy construction of his small vessel. The entrance to the fjord was now visible through the curtain of precipitation, a narrow opening between towering rock walls that promised shelter from the Fury building behind him. Elias maneuvered carefully, mindful of the submerged rocks that guarded the entrance like silent sentinels. One mistake here would mean disaster, but he'd navigated this passage many times before. The Sea Lark slipped into the relative calm of the fjord just as the full force of the storm hit the open water behind them. Elias exhaled slowly, offering silent thanks for the timely refuge. He guided the boat deeper into the protected waterway, seeking the small cove near the eastern wall where he'd anchored during previous storms. Below the surface, the Abyss Watcher had also entered the fjord, its damaged systems struggling to maintain depth and direction in the confused currents. The engineering crew worked frantically to initiate repairs, but many critical components would require extensive refabrication. "Commander," called the sensor officer, "the human vessel has entered the fjord and is proceeding inward along a similar trajectory." Kalen felt his anxiety spike. Distance: approximately 800 meters above and ahead of our position. "Too close," he muttered. "Find a suitable location for emergency repairs. Priority is restoration of stealth capabilities and propulsion." The ship continued its cautious progress into the fjord, mapping the underwater topography as it went. Eventually, they located a suitable position, a deep section with an overhanging rock formation that would provide additional concealment from surface observation. "Hold position here," Kalen ordered. "Begin repairs immediately. I want hourly progress reports." As the Aquilarian crew set about their emergency procedures, Elias had found his preferred anchoring spot in a small, protected cove. The Sea Lark rode easily at anchor, sheltered from the worst of the wind that howled across the fjord's entrance. The old fisherman set about securing his equipment and preparing a simple meal in the boat's tiny galley. This would likely be an overnight stay. The storm showed no signs of abating quickly. Hours passed. In the depths of the fjord, the Abyss Watcher's crew worked tirelessly on repairs, but progress was slower than hoped. The damage to the primary propulsion system was extensive, requiring complete recalibration of the antimatter containment fields. The stealth systems were even more problematic. Several key emitter nodes had been physically damaged and would need replacement rather than repair. "Commander," the chief engineer reported, "we need to move closer to the surface." Kalen stared incredulously. "Explain." "The stealth field generators require recalibration against an atmospheric reference point. From this depth, we cannot achieve proper synchronization. We need to ascend to at least 100 meters. Kalen felt the familiar cold grip of thalassophobia tightening around his chest. Closer to the surface meant closer to the chaos, closer to detection. "Is there no alternative?" he asked. "Not if we want functioning stealth capabilities within the next 72 hours. Kalen considered their situation. The storm above would actually work in their favor, reducing the likelihood of casual observation. And the human vessel was anchored some distance away, its sole occupant likely confined by the weather. Very well, he conceded reluctantly. Ascend to 100 meters, maintain minimal energy signature, and keep constant surveillance on the human vessel. The Abyss Watcher began its slow ascent, system straining under the reduced power allocations. As they approached the designated depth, a new problem emerged. "Sir," reported the navigation officer with alarm, "the current has intensified unexpectedly. We're being pushed toward the eastern wall of the fjord." "Compensate," Kalen ordered. "Attempting, but secondary propulsion is insufficient against this flow." Kalen felt the ship shudder as emergency thrusters engaged, burning through their limited power reserves at an alarming rate. "We need to surface," the chief engineer stated flatly. "The current is strongest at this depth. If we go above it, we can maintain position with minimal power expenditure." Kalen wanted to refuse, but the ship's increasing instability left no room for debate. "Surface minimal profile. Engage emergency buoyancy protocols with controlled venting of ballast systems." The Abyss Watcher rose through the water column until its uppermost section broke the surface. Designed for prolonged underwater operation, the ship resembled a sleek, metallic island protruding just above the waterline. Unusual, but not immediately identifiable as extraterrestrial in origin. Unfortunately, its position was clearly visible from one particular vantage point within the fjord, the exact location where Elias had anchored the Sea Lark. The old fisherman had been checking his vessel's security when a strange shape caught his eye through the rain-streaked window of the wheelhouse. Squinting into the gloom, he could make out what appeared to be a dark metallic structure where no such thing should exist. "What in the world?" he muttered, reaching for his binoculars. Through the magnified lenses, he studied the object. Definitely artificial, definitely not a natural formation, and definitely not something that had been in this fjord during his previous visits. Its surface had an unusual sheen that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the limited light, and its lines were too perfect, too engineered to be anything but man-made. Or so he assumed. Elias considered his options. The storm still raged outside the fjord, making any departure impossible. Whatever this strange object was, he was sharing the fjord with it for the duration. The responsible action would be to check if it represented some kind of vessel in distress, perhaps an experimental submarine or research craft caught in the same storm. He prepared the Sea Lark's small auxiliary boat, a sturdy dinghy that could handle the relatively calm waters within the fjord. With practiced movements, he lowered it over the side and climbed down, starting the small outboard motor with a single pull. On the Abyss Watcher, alarms blared. "Commander, the human is approaching our position." Kalen rushed to the observation screen, horrified to see the small boat making its way directly toward them. How did this happen? Why wasn't I informed immediately that we were visible from the surface? The calculation did not account for the human vessel's exact position, Lyra admitted. A critical oversight. Kalen fought down panic. "Options. We cannot submerge without completing the current phase of repairs," the engineer informed him. "Attempting to do so would cause a catastrophic system failure. And we cannot be discovered," Kalen stated, the absolute imperative of the non-interference protocols hanging over every decision. "Sir," Lyra suggested hesitantly, "the protocols allow for limited contact in emergency situations, provided we maintain technological superiority perception and implement memory adjustment procedures afterward." Kalen had hoped to avoid this contingency. Limited contact was permitted only in the most extreme circumstances, and even then, it required extensive documentation and justification to the central authority. "Prepare the universal translator," he ordered finally. "Minimal crew presence on the exposed sections. Simple communication only. We are a research vessel, experimental technology caught in the storm." As Elias approached the strange vessel, he maintained a cautious distance, circling slowly to assess its nature. It was like no submarine or ship he'd ever seen. No visible propellers, no conventional hull markings, not even the expected protrusions of a conning tower or communication arrays. Just smooth, dark metal with subtle curves that somehow suggested immense speed and power despite its current immobility. "Hello," he called out, voice nearly lost in the wind. "Anyone aboard? Do you need assistance?" For several long moments, there was no response. Then, with startling suddenness, a section of the hull seemed to shimmer and transform, revealing what appeared to be a small observation platform. A figure stood there, human in general outline, but somehow wrong in the details that Elias couldn't quite discern through the rain and distance. "We are experiencing technical difficulties," came a voice that sounded oddly processed, as though filtered through several layers of electronic modulation. "No assistance required. Temporary situation only." Elias frowned, steering his dinghy slightly closer, but still maintaining a respectful distance. "Pretty nasty storm out there. You sure you're all right? How about a radio if you need to call for help?" On the Abyss Watcher's command deck, Kalen watched the exchange through remote sensors, Lyra at his side providing real-time cultural and linguistic context. "The human is offering communication assistance," she translated. "Their concern appears genuine rather than suspicious. Maintain minimal engagement." Kalen instructed the crew member who had volunteered for the unenviable task of surface contact. "Accept no direct assistance that would require physical contact or boarding." Through the translator, the crew member conveyed their thanks but declined immediate help. "Our communications systems are being repaired. We appreciate your concern." Elias nodded slowly, still studying the vessel with undisguised curiosity. "What kind of ship is this? Never seen anything like it before." A moment of silence followed as the Aquilarians scrambled for an appropriate response. "Experimental research vessel," came the reply, finally. "Testing new hydrodynamic designs. Confidential project." "Ah," Elias said with understanding. "Military then? Or government at least?" He'd encountered secretive vessels before in his decades at sea and knew better than to press for details they wouldn't share. "Well, this fjord's the safest place to wait out this storm. I'm anchored just around that outcropping if you change your mind about needing anything." He gestured toward his fishing boat, visible in the distance. "We appreciate your discretion," the Aquilarian representative responded, relief evident despite the translation filters. Elias gave a casual two-fingered salute, then turned his dinghy back toward the Sea Lark. As he motored away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the vessel and its occupant had been deeply unusual, beyond just advanced technology. The proportions had seemed wrong, the movements slightly off, the voice too artificial even for radio communication. But he was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. Some things weren't his business to know, and secret military projects certainly fell into that category. Back aboard the Abyss Watcher, Kalen allowed himself a moment of relief. "The human appears to have accepted our explanation. For now," Lyra cautioned, "but our position remains extremely vulnerable. If repairs are not completed before the storm abates, we risk broader exposure." "Understood." Engineering, provide an updated timeline for essential systems restoration. The chief engineer's response was not encouraging. Minimum of 18 standard hours for basic propulsion capability. Stealth systems will require additional time. Kalen processed this unwelcome news. The storm, meteorological analysis suggests it will maintain current intensity for approximately 12 hours, followed by gradual dissipation over the subsequent 6 to 8 hours, Lyra reported. "Then we have a narrow window," Kalen concluded. "Prioritize propulsion over stealth. We can depart under cover of the final storm conditions and implement full stealth once we reach deep water." As the Aquilarian crew redoubled their repair efforts, Elias returned to the Sea Lark and secured his dinghy. Inside the warm wheelhouse, he prepared a simple dinner, occasionally glancing toward the mysterious vessel partially visible in the distance. His radio remained silent. No distress calls, no Coast Guard alerts about experimental craft in the area. Whatever they were doing out here, they clearly preferred to handle their problems internally. As night fell, the storm continued its assault on the coastal region, howling across the fjord's entrance while the sheltered waters remained relatively calm. Elias settled into his narrow bunk for the night, the familiar rocking of the sea lark soon lulling him towards sleep despite the unusual circumstances. His last conscious thought was that something about the vessel's occupant had seemed almost afraid, not of the storm, but of something else entirely. It was the kind of fear he recognized from city dwellers on their first deep-sea fishing trip, the primal, instinctive terror of an environment humans weren't naturally designed to inhabit, which made no sense at all for the crew of an advanced submarine. Morning brought marginal improvement in the weather. The rain had slackened to a steady drizzle, though the winds remained strong enough to generate substantial waves beyond the fjord's protected entrance. Elias rose with the dawn, as was his lifelong habit, preparing a pot of strong coffee and a simple breakfast before checking his vessel's systems and the security of his mooring. The mysterious vessel remained in its position, showing no obvious signs of activity, though Elias occasionally glimpsed movement on what he now considered its small deck area. They appeared to be conducting repairs of some kind, though the nature of their work was obscured by both distance and the vessel's unusual design. Aboard the Abyss Watcher, Kalen received the morning's repair update with barely concealed frustration. The primary propulsion couplings are proving more difficult to realign than anticipated, the chief engineer explained. The quantum resonance is unstable due to interference from the mineral composition of the surrounding rock formation, meaning we need an additional 8 to 10 hours beyond our initial estimate. Kalen suppressed his rising anxiety. That puts us well beyond the projected storm duration. We'll be exposed in clear conditions. There may be an alternative, Lyra suggested, reviewing the sensor data. If we can modify our departure plan to utilize the fjord's underwater currents, we could reduce our power requirements by approximately 40%. This would allow us to function with the partial repairs already completed. The same currents that pushed us off course initially? Yes, but used to our advantage rather than fighting against them. The difficulty is precisely calculating their patterns, which vary based on tidal influences and storm intensity. Kalen considered this, and our current sensors cannot map these patterns accurately enough. Not with the damage to the external sensor array. We would need surface-level readings from multiple positions within the fjord. Impossible. We cannot risk further surface exposure or deploying sensor buoys that might be observed. The command deck fell silent as the implications became clear. Their options were narrowing dangerously. It was Science Officer Lyra who eventually broke the silence. The human vessel is equipped with basic depth-finding technology, and its occupant has demonstrated considerable knowledge of local maritime conditions. Kalen stared at her. You cannot possibly be suggesting. Limited technological sharing is permitted under extreme circumstances, Commander. We could provide the human with modified sensor equipment. Nothing that would reveal our true nature, but sufficient to gather the data we require. Absolutely not, Kalen stated emphatically. The risk of contamination is too great. With respect, Commander, the risk of prolonged exposure and potential discovery by multiple humans when the storm clears is greater. The debate might have continued, but an urgent alert from the sensor station interrupted them. Commander, detecting massive biomass movement at the fjord entrance. All attention turned to the main display, where sensors revealed an enormous shape moving slowly into the protected waters. The entity was biological in nature. A massive marine organism approximately 30 meters in length with a complex internal structure unlike any documented Earth species. Classification? Kalen demanded. The science station worked frantically to analyze the readings. Unknown, sir. The entity shares characteristics with several Earth cetacean species, but possesses anomalous features, including bioluminescent organs and an unusually developed brain case. Lyra studied the readings with growing concern. It appears to be pursuing something, possibly driven into the fjord by the storm, or what? Or attracted by our presence, she finished reluctantly. The damaged antimatter containment field is generating a unique electromagnetic signature. If this creature navigates by detecting such fields, it's hunting us, Kalen realized with horror. The ancient fear gripped him. the evolutionary memory of oceanic predators that had haunted his species for millions of years. The human vessel, reported the sensor officer. It's underway, moving directly toward the entity's position. On the Sea Lark, Elias had spotted unusual water movement at the fjord entrance, a distinctive ripple pattern that his decades of experience told him wasn't caused by wind or current. Something large was moving into the fjord, something that displaced a substantial volume of water with its passage. His first thought was whales, perhaps a humpback or fin whale seeking shelter from storm. It wouldn't be unprecedented, though certainly rare. But as he trained his binoculars on the disturbance, what he glimpsed sent a chill through his weather-worn frame. The creature was whale-like in general form, but wrong in almost every detail. Its skin had an unnatural bioluminescent quality, visible even in daylight. Its movements were too deliberate, too focused for a baleen whale, and its head shape suggested something altogether different from the cetaceans he'd encountered throughout his life. Most concerning was its trajectory, a direct path toward the mysterious vessel. Without hesitation, Elias started the Sea Lark's engine and began raising anchor. Whatever that creature was, its presence in combination with the strange vessel suggested a connection, perhaps even danger. And regardless of their secretive nature, he couldn't simply watch if they were at risk. He guided the Sea Lark toward the creature's position, maintaining a cautious distance while trying to assess the situation. Through his binoculars, he could see increased activity on the vessel's exposed section, frantic movement, and what appeared to be the deployment of some kind of equipment. Reaching for his radio, he tried to contact them. Unknown vessel, this is fishing boat Sea Lark. Be advised there's an unidentified marine animal approaching your position. Large cetacean-type creature behaving unusually. Do you copy? Aboard the Abyss Watcher, Kalen heard the transmission translated through their systems. The human has identified the entity and is warning us, Lyra reported unnecessarily. Ignore the transmission, Kalen ordered. Focus on defensive preparations. The chief engineer's voice came through with disturbing news. Commander, our defense systems are offline. The power rerouting for repairs has left the energy weapons without sufficient charge. Reroute emergency power. Already done, sir. We'll have minimal defensive capability at best. Not enough to repel a creature of this size. Kalen fought rising panic. Their situation had deteriorated from unfortunate to potentially catastrophic in moments. Without full defensive capabilities, a direct encounter with the approaching entity could result in complete mission failure, not to mention the very real danger to the crew. The radio crackled again with Elias's voice, more insistent this time. Unknown vessel, please respond. That creature is heading straight for you, and it's no ordinary whale. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years at sea. Lyra looked to Kalen. Commander, the human might provide valuable information about the entity. After a moment's hesitation, Kalen nodded reluctantly. Establish communication. Limited information exchange only. The communications officer activated the translator. Sea Lark, we read you. We are monitoring the entity. Any information you can provide about its behavior would be appreciated. Elias heard the stilted response with relief. At least they were listening now. It's moving with purpose, not like normal feeding behavior. Almost like it's homing in on something. You folks giving off any kind of signal or vibration. Some cetaceans are sensitive to specific frequencies. There was a pause before the response came. Our systems may be producing unusual outputs due to damage sustained during the storm. That might be it, then, Elias confirmed, continuing to observe the creature's approach. Look, I don't know what kind of capabilities your vessel has, but that thing is big enough to cause serious damage if it decides to get aggressive. Do you have any deterrents aboard? Acoustic devices, anything like that? Another pause, longer this time. Our defensive systems are currently compromised. The gravity of that admission wasn't lost on Elias. Whatever this vessel was, it was currently vulnerable and directly in the path of something potentially dangerous. He made a quick decision. I'm going to try to distract it. I've got some equipment that might help. Hydrophones we sometimes use to track schools of fish and an emergency acoustic deterrent for keeping sharks away from the nets. Before the Abyss Watcher could respond, Elias was already moving, retrieving the equipment from the Sea Lark storage compartments. The acoustic deterrent was a relatively simple device, essentially an underwater speaker system that could broadcast specific frequencies known to irritate or repel various marine predators without causing permanent harm. On the Abyss Watcher, Kalen watched in disbelief as the tiny fishing vessel began maneuvering between their position and the approaching entity. "What is the human doing?" he demanded. Lyra analyzed the sensor readings. "It appears to be deploying some kind of acoustic device, primitive technology designed to affect marine life behavior. That will never deter an entity of this magnitude," Kalen stated. "The human is endangering itself needlessly." Yet the sensors told a different story. The massive creature had indeed reacted to the acoustic emissions, altering its course slightly. Not retreating, but at least temporarily distracted from its direct approach to the Abyss Watcher. "It's responding to the frequency," Lyra noted with surprise. "Not repelled entirely, but its approach has slowed. The human appears to be adjusting the broadcast parameters, testing different ranges." Kalen watched with growing fascination as the primitive fishing vessel maneuvered with surprising agility, maintaining a careful distance from the creature while continuously adjusting its acoustic emissions. The human was demonstrating not just courage, but a sophisticated understanding of the entity's responses, an adaptive intelligence that Kalen had not expected. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "the human is hailing us again." "Put it through." Elias's voice came clearly through the translator. "It's responding to the lower frequencies, but I don't think this will hold it for long. I need to know more about what might be attracting it to your vessel. Anything unusual, electromagnetic fields, radioactive materials, unusual metals." Kalen hesitated. Sharing details of their propulsion system violated multiple protocols. Yet without the human's intervention, they faced imminent danger. "We utilize advanced propulsion technology," he responded carefully. "Currently damaged and producing an unusual electromagnetic signature." "That could be it," Elias confirmed. "Some deep-sea creatures navigate by electromagnetic fields. If yours is unusual or particularly strong, it might be reading you as either prey or a potential mate." The casual way the human discussed such complex concepts, electromagnetic navigation in marine life, caught Kalen off guard. This primitive being possessed a sophisticated understanding of oceanic life that rivaled their own scientific knowledge in some respects. "I have an idea," Elias continued, "but I'll need to come alongside your vessel. Are you able to receive a small package? Something I can transfer without boarding?" Kalen conferred quickly with his officers before responding. "We can receive a package. What do you propose?" "I've got a spare emergency transponder with its own power source. If I can modify it to broadcast a similar electromagnetic signature to your vessel, we might be able to lure that thing away. Create a decoy, essentially." It was an elegantly simple solution, one that the Aquilarians, with all their advanced technology, had not considered. Their defensive strategies relied on sophisticated energy weapons and shield systems, not on manipulating the behavior of biological entities through mimicry and deception. "Proceed," Kalen authorized after brief consideration. "We will prepare to receive the package." As the Sea Lark cautiously approached the Abyss Watcher, Elias caught his first clear glimpse of the vessel's observation platform and its occupant. The shock of what he saw momentarily froze him in place. The figure standing there was humanoid, but unmistakably not human. Even through the rain and dim light, the differences were obvious. The elongated proportions, the iridescent skin tone, the oversized eyes that reflected light in a distinctly non-human manner. Elias took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the immediate crisis rather than the implications of what he was seeing. Whatever or whoever these beings were, they were in danger, and so was he if that creature decided to become aggressive. "I'm coming alongside," he radioed, his voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. "I've modified the transponder to broadcast on a similar frequency to what I'm detecting from your vessel. It has about 6 hours of battery life. The Abyss Watcher had extended a small receiving platform, barely large enough for the transfer. As the Sea Lark eased alongside, keeping a careful distance from the main hull, Elias could see more details of the vessel's unusual construction, materials and design principles entirely foreign to Earth engineering. He handed over the modified transponder to the figure on the platform, their eyes meeting briefly in a moment of silent acknowledgement. The alien, for Elias could think of no other appropriate term, handled the device with evident caution, examining it with movements that seemed both precise and strangely fluid. "It's set to activate on command," Elias explained, pointing to a simple switch mechanism. "Once it's on, get it as far from your ship as possible. The creature should follow it instead of you." The alien nodded, a gesture surprisingly human despite its foreign appearance. "We appreciate this assistance," came the translated voice. "Don't thank me yet," Elias replied, already maneuvering the Sea Lark away from the vessel. "That thing's getting impatient with my noisemakers. We need to move quickly." Indeed, the massive creature had resumed its approach, apparently adapting to the acoustic deterrence. Its bioluminescent patterns had intensified, pulsing in what seemed like agitation or hunting excitement. Aboard the Abyss Watcher, Kalen examined the primitive device with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. The technology was laughably simple by Aquilarian standards. Basic circuitry, rudimentary power source, crude electromagnetic emitter, yet designed with an intuitive understanding of marine predator behavior that their own scientists might have overlooked. "Will this actually work?" he asked Lyra. She analyzed the device quickly. "The principle is sound. If the entity is indeed tracking our electromagnetic signature, this should produce a convincing alternative target. However, its effective range will be limited by the power source. Deploy it immediately," Kalen ordered, "and prepare for emergency submersion the moment our systems can support it." A small launch mechanism was hastily adapted to propel the transponder away from the vessel. As it splashed into the water several hundred meters distant, Lyra activated it remotely. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted in response, its massive form changing direction with surprising agility to investigate the new signal source. As it moved away from both vessels, Elias circled back toward the Abyss Watcher. "It's working," he called over the radio. "But we're not out of danger yet. That decoy won't fool it for long, and when it realizes there's nothing there, it'll likely return to the stronger signal, your ship." Kalen understood the implications. "Our repairs are progressing, but we cannot yet submerge safely or depart at speed." Elias considered their predicament. The storm was beginning to abate, which meant they would soon lose the protection of its chaos. If other vessels ventured into the fjord or aircraft flew overhead, the unusual vessel would be exposed. And if the creature returned, its attacks might draw even more unwanted attention. "I know this coastline better than anyone," he said finally. "There's a deeper section of this fjord, about 2 kilometers from here, where underwater caves connect to the open ocean. If your vessel can navigate through them, you could escape without being spotted from the surface." The suggestion was met with silence. "Then, how will we locate these caves? Our sensing equipment is damaged." "I'll guide you," Elias said simply. "I've mapped most of them over the years, dropping lines to check depths and currents. Some are large enough for your vessel, though it'll be tight in places." Kalen conferred hurriedly with his navigation officer and chief engineer. The proposal was risky, navigating unknown subterranean passages with damaged systems, but potentially offered their only viable escape route. "And the entity?" Kalen asked. "We'll need to time this carefully," Elias explained. "Once the decoy stops working, that thing will return. But if we can get your ship moving toward the cave system before that happens, I can use the Sea Lark to distract it. Lead it on a chase back out of the fjord while you make your escape through the caves." It was an audacious plan, requiring precision, timing, and coordination between vessels with vastly different capabilities. More concerningly for Kalen, it meant placing absolute trust in a primitive being who had already discovered their non-terrestrial nature. Yet what choice did they have? "We accept your proposal," Kalen said finally. How do we proceed? I'll transfer detailed depth charts to you, Elias replied. They're hand-drawn but accurate. Then I'll lead you to the cave entrance while monitoring our friend out there. When it starts to lose interest in the decoy, I'll signal you to begin your entry into the cave system while I create a diversion. As Elias returned briefly to the Sea Lark to retrieve his charts, Lyra approached Kalen privately. Commander, this exceeds all established contact protocols. The human has clearly identified our true nature. I'm aware, Kalen responded grimly. But the alternatives are worse. Complete mission failure, possible capture of our technology, widespread exposure. And afterward, the required memory adjustment procedure will be complex given the extent of interaction. Kalen watched through the observation screen as Elias worked efficiently on his small vessel, gathering materials and checking systems with practiced ease. We will address that once we are safely away from this location. The transfer of Elias's hand-drawn charts proceeded quickly. Despite their primitive nature, paper and pencil markings with handwritten depth notations, they contained a wealth of detailed information about the fjord's underwater topography that impressed even the Aquilarian navigation specialists. These are remarkably accurate for having been created without advanced sensing technology, Lyra noted as they digitized and integrated the charts into their navigation systems. The human has likely spent decades accumulating this knowledge, Kalen observed, beginning to appreciate the depth of experience represented by Elias's weathered appearance. With the charts transferred and a communication link established, the operation began. The Abyss Watcher engaged its damaged propulsion systems at minimal power, following the Sea Lark deeper into the fjord. Elias guided them with calm efficiency, occasionally providing additional details about current patterns or submerged obstacles not fully captured in his charts. In the distance, the massive creature continued to investigate the decoy transponder, but sensors indicated its movements were becoming more erratic, a sign it was beginning to recognize the deception. It's getting restless, Elias reported, keeping one eye on the disturbance in the water. We have maybe 10 minutes before it loses interest completely. Are your engines ready for the cave approach? The chief engineer reported from below decks. We've achieved 60% propulsion capability, Commander. Sufficient for low-speed maneuvering, but not rapid acceleration. It will have to be enough, Kalen decided. Proceed as planned. They approached the underwater cave entrance, a massive, dark opening in the fjord wall, invisible from the surface, but clearly defined in Elias's charts. The Sea Lark circled above it, while the Abyss Watcher positioned itself for entry. Beginning final approach, Kalen announced. Just then, sensors blared a warning. The creature had abandoned the decoy and was now racing back toward their position at alarming speed. It's coming, Elias called, already turning the Sea Lark toward the fjord entrance. Get into the cave. I'll lead it away. Without waiting for confirmation, he opened the Sea Lark's engine to full power, heading directly toward the oncoming creature while deploying his acoustic deterrents at maximum volume. It was a desperately brave move, placing his tiny vessel directly in the path of the massive entity to create a diversion. Kalen watched in astonishment as the human deliberately provoked the creature, firing emergency flares to create visual distractions while broadcasting chaotic acoustic patterns that seemed calculated to confuse and irritate. The creature hesitated, its attention torn between the powerful electromagnetic signature of the Abyss Watcher and the sensory chaos being projected by the Sea Lark. Then, provoked by a particularly close approach from Elias, it changed course to pursue the smaller vessel. Now, get into the cave while it's chasing me, Elias shouted over the communication link as he led the creature in a tight turn away from the Aquilarian vessel. The Abyss Watcher seized the opportunity, diving toward the cave entrance with as much speed as its damaged systems could generate. The navigation officer worked frantically to translate Elias's charts into a viable passage route, adjusting for the vessel's dimensions and movement limitations. As they entered the darkness of the underwater passage, Kalen experienced a moment of primal terror. The enclosed space, the enormous pressure of rock above them, the limited visibility all triggered deep-seated phobias. But there was no turning back now. "Maintain course," he ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Follow the human's charted route precisely." Outside in the fjord, Elias was engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the creature. The sea lark's superior maneuverability and Elias's intimate knowledge of the fjord's features allowed him to stay just ahead of his pursuer, leading it gradually toward the open sea. Each time the creature nearly closed the distance, Elias would execute a sharp turn around a rock formation or shallow area that the larger entity was forced to avoid. His decades of experience navigating these waters had never been put to such a critical test. Inside the cave system, the Abyss Watcher proceeded cautiously, its external lights illuminating a passage that twisted and narrowed alarmingly in places. Twice they were forced to halt and recalculate their approach to navigate particularly tight sections, the hull passing within meters of jagged rock formations. "Contact with the human vessel lost," reported the communications officer. "Signal cannot penetrate the cave system." Kalen acknowledged this with grim understanding. They had no way of knowing if Elias had successfully evaded the creature or fallen victim to it. Their focus now had to be on their own escape. After 20 tense minutes of careful navigation, sensors detected changing water conditions ahead. "Commander, we're approaching the exit point indicated in the human's charts," announced the navigation officer. "Current velocity increasing, salinity consistent with open ocean conditions. Proceed with caution. Maintain stealth protocols once we exit." The passage widened gradually, finally opening into the dark waters of the North Atlantic. They had emerged several kilometers from the fjord entrance, well away from the storm-affected coastal areas and at a depth that would shield them from casual surface observation. "Set course for deep water," Kalen ordered. "Maximum safe speed with our current capabilities." As the Abyss Watcher moved away from the coast, Lyra approached the command station. "Commander, we have an ethical obligation to determine the human status. His actions directly enabled our escape." Kalen nodded slowly. "Agreed. Passive scans only, minimal power signature." The long-range sensors swept back toward the coastal region, searching for the distinctive outline of the sea lark. After several tense minutes, they located it, battered but intact, making its way steadily back toward the fishing village it had originally departed from. A collective relief passed through the command deck. Against all probability, the human had survived his encounter with the creature and successfully led it away from both their position and populated areas. "He succeeded," Lyra said softly, genuine admiration in her voice. With nothing more than primitive technology and personal skill, Kalen found himself equally impressed. In all their observations of Earth's indigenous species, they had categorized humans as clever but fundamentally limited by their technological development. This single encounter had forced him to reconsider that assessment. "The memory adjustment procedure," he said finally. "We are still required to implement it." Lyra hesitated. Given the extent of interaction and the service rendered, perhaps a modified approach would be appropriate. "The protocols allow some discretion based on exceptional circumstances." "What are you suggesting?" "Rather than complete erasure, which could be psychologically damaging given the intensity of these experiences, we could implement a partial attenuation, transforming the memories into something the human would interpret as a dream or a vision, preserving the core experience but removing the explicit confirmation of extraterrestrial contact." Kalen considered this. It would satisfy the letter of the non-interference protocols while acknowledging the debt they owed this remarkable individual. "Prepare the procedure as specified," he ordered, "and include a commendation in the mission report regarding the human designated NE 478. His actions merit recognition in our scientific record." 3 days later, Elias sat on the small dock beside his cottage, mending nets with the practiced movements of a lifetime fisherman. The sea lark rested nearby, showing a few new scars from its recent adventure, but otherwise sound and seaworthy. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind clear skies and calm seas. Already the events in the fjord were taking on a dreamlike quality in his mind. The strange vessel, its even stranger occupants, the bioluminescent sea creature that had pursued him halfway to the open ocean before finally abandoning the chase. Had it all happened exactly as he remembered? Sometimes he wasn't entirely sure. The details seemed to shift slightly when he tried to focus on them too directly, like trying to recall a vivid dream after waking. What remained clear was the feeling, the exhilaration of the chase, the satisfaction of problem-solving under pressure, and most distinctly, the moment of connection when he had looked into those large, alien eyes and seen something recognizable despite their obvious differences: intelligence, fear, and gratitude. Whether reality or fantasy, the experience had left him with a profound sense of wonder about the depths of the ocean he had spent his life traversing. What other mysteries might it hold? What other encounters might await in its vastness? He smiled to himself as he returned to his nets. Perhaps one day he would learn the truth. Until then, the sea remained as it always had been, his livelihood, his home, and his greatest teacher. Millions of light years away, Commander Kalin presented his mission report to the Aquilarian Central Science Authority. The data from Earth's oceans was valuable as always, but it was his addendum regarding the encounter in the fjord that drew the most attention from the assembled officials. "You propose a substantial revision to our classification of human adaptive intelligence based on interaction with a single specimen?" questioned one senior authority with obvious skepticism. "I do," Kalin confirmed without hesitation. "The encounter demonstrated capabilities we have consistently underestimated in our previous assessments. Not merely tool usage or pattern recognition, but a fundamental understanding of complex ecosystems and the ability to improvise effective solutions with minimal resources. And you believe this warrants a reconsideration of our non-interference stance regarding Earth's oceanic regions?" Kalin chose his words carefully. "I believe it warrants further study. The human displayed an approach to oceanic environments that differs fundamentally from our own historical experience. Not domination through technology, but adaptation through understanding. There may be valuable insights to be gained from this perspective. Insights that might help address our species' continued thalassophobia," added Science Officer Lyra, who had joined Kalin for the presentation. "Despite our technological advancement, we remain fundamentally limited by our evolutionary fear of deep-water environments. This human demonstrated an alternative relationship with such environments that may prove instructive." The authority members conferred briefly before the senior official spoke again. "Your recommendation is noted, Commander. We will authorize expanded study parameters for future Earth missions, with particular focus on human adaptation strategies in maritime environments." It was a small concession, but an important one. For a species that had fled the oceans eons ago, even considering that there might be something to learn from primitive beings who embrace such environments represented a significant shift in perspective. As Kalin departed the chamber, Lyra fell in a step beside him. "A successful outcome, Commander. Though I suspect the human would be amused to know he's now the subject of dedicated scientific inquiry." Kalin allowed himself a rare smile, remembering the weathered face and steady gaze of the elderly fisherman who had faced down a deep-sea leviathan in a wooden boat. "I suspect he would take it in stride, Science Officer." He seemed quite accustomed to navigating the unexpected. Indeed, back on Earth, Elias was preparing the Sea Lark for another day at sea. As he cast off from the dock, his gaze was drawn momentarily to the clear morning sky above, a habit he had developed recently without quite knowing why. With a slight smile and a shake of his head, he turned his attention back to the waves ahead, guiding his vessel with the same quiet confidence he always had out into the vast ocean that some distant travelers had once believed unconquerable.